I also met this amazing person called Dr. Mario Martinez, who studied centenarians and super centenarians, people that have lived 100 to 110 well, not the ones that aren't so well, but the ones that are still quite well. And he said the number one thing, there's 4 factors, but the number one thing is your belief about aging.
Right. Absolutely.
So the time and space, having no time and space about aging. What he means by that is that he'll meet a 103-year-old tending to his garden, and he'll say to him, I can't wait to show you my garden in 3 years.
Wow.
That's one example. And there's other examples too and I can go on and on about this, but it's your belief about and it can be simple things like how you enjoy a cup of tea, for example. Like you really enjoy that moment. You enjoy just waking up and breathing. So that belief that you're, and Eddie Jaku talks about this in his book too, and I see it in my own life and others. It's just loving to be alive drives loving to be alive, which drives loving to be alive across your lifespan. And then that takes out a lot of other things, right? Because then as you feel better, you bring in all these other things which you hear about in the blue zones, around connection and being supported and eating kind of not too much, 80% full, more green vegetables and lean meats than not. It doesn't say about no alcohol or anything. It's more about how you're consuming it, that kind of thing. So all those other factors, of course, are important. But he said it's that belief about aging that really became the number one thing that separated the healthy centenarians from the unhealthy ones.
Welcome, everyone, to HEARTtalk, coming to you live from Kota Kinabalu in Sabah in Malaysia. Wherever you're from, whichever part of the world, thank you for joining us, and we love your company. Today is a big day, is an auspicious day, because we have a terrific guest with us. And I want to start off by saying these words. The brain's natural ability to change itself and rewire itself to changes in our thoughts, our feelings, and our experience of life itself is the most powerful revolutionary testament to the power of what is called neuroplasticity. Professor Dr. Selena Bartlett is my guest today, and I'm so honored to have her with us because she is a brain health and fitness leader focused on how to build brain resilience to enhance mental strength and lead a healthier lifestyle. Dr. Selena is a world authority on the role of neuroscience and neuroplasticity in the brain health. And after studying the brain for more than 30 years, it is clear, according to Dr. Selena, that to understand the brain as a muscle that needs daily training changes how we view people's behavior. The future of brain science is personalized and preventive. And it's also important for us to know that she was awarded the Laurie Austin Award for her contributions to neuroscience by the Australian Neuroscience Society. She was a recipient of the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Biotech Research Award, and was an ambassador for the Women in Technology organization. Professor Bartlett is also the host of the Thriving Minds podcast, and I encourage all of you to tune in and listen to it because it's got really a huge amount of interesting topics that are discussed. She's also written over 100 scientific research articles, launched 3 books to raise awareness, so brain health becomes everyone's business rather than someone else's problems. So would you join me today and welcome at this lunchtime for a light and easy conversation with the one and only Professor Dr. Selena Bartlett. Welcome, Selena. Come join us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and this is my first podcast into Malaysia, so that is very exciting.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's really a tribute to have you with us, and we're honored to have you. So thank you so much. As I was reading that, I was thinking this morning, I was preparing my conversation with you, And I was reminded of Stevie Wonder's song. He sings this song called "You Are the Sunshine of My Life," and I put in the word Selena, and we will always stay around you because you have become a sunshine to so many people's lives because of your work. And I want to congratulate you for the amount of years that you have researched and brought a better understanding of how we can live a better life. So on that note, thank you and congratulations, Selena.
Thank you.
You are for the right time, for the right moment. And so we want to welcome you in. And I want to say this, that to think that the adult brain changes with every input that comes in means learning is for life and life is for learning. So let's start there, Selena. I mean, how did you get onto this journey that has now ignited the brain? And I've got one here, right here with me, and it's a model that I borrowed from my colleague next door. And I wanted to do this in front of you and in front of her. I've never hugged my brain. And I can tell you one thing, it is a beautiful feeling that the first time in my life, 40 years in the medical doctor in my career, to be able to hug my brain and respect it for this wonderful organ in the body. So Selena, tell me, talk to us. How has this brain life mattered to you so much today?
Well, I was a pharmacist, as you are kind of aware of, and I was probably what many people would be feeling that are listening. I was probably just a player in my life at that point, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but my sister got really ill during this time. And I was with her in a mental hospital in Brisbane, and she was 21 at the time. And I was became shocked at what was happening to her. And it became very clear to me during that time that we didn't know how the brain worked.
Right.
Because if we did, there's no way what was happening with my sister would end up with that kind of treatment, which was like a straitjacket, overdose of haloperidol, etc. And so I stopped being a pharmacist, even though I still worked as one. I went back and did my PhD in neuropharmacology at the University of Queensland in Brisbane. And then I moved to Canberra at the Australian National University, the ANU, and I got trained by the top neuroscientists during that time.
Right.
And then during that time, I started to run out of techniques. So I couldn't really see inside the brain at that point in the 90s. We didn't have the technology or the tools to light up the brain. And so then I moved to San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco, in the Department of Neurology at the Ernest Gallo Clinic and Research Center, it was called back then. And I ended up becoming a principal investigator and running a lab there for 12 years. Now, during that time, I had very much a focus around addiction, not mental illness, because the models that we had to study it weren't very sufficient, and they still really aren't. So addiction is really good because you can create a model where you can understand it more sufficiently. And I didn't want to be working on something where I didn't really understand the variables or the inputs. And I think as a surgeon, you probably understand this really clearly because we were doing brain surgeries, but in animal models at that point. But you have to know what you're doing, don't you? You need to know the piping. You need to know the connections, the nerves. You can't just go in and cut everything because people end up really disabled. So during that time, I was developing drugs. I was using my pharmacist hat, which served me really well. I ended up getting a lot of NIH funding, and I became really famous for discovering a drug called Champex in Australia, Chantix in the US. I don't know what it's called in Malaysia, but it's a nicotine cessation drug that helps people stop smoking. My lab discovered that it stops people drinking as well. But not in an animal model, but then we translated that to human clinical studies around the world. And it was during this transition time, which I'm sure we're going to get into, that I discovered neuroplasticity by a woman that set up a lab next to mine. And she's one of the experts and you mentioned in the LinkedIn post, Michael Masinich, and he wrote Softwired. Well, his postdoc at the time ended up setting up her lab next to mine. at
Okay.
UCSF. And so she's passed me, how you have meetings with your colleagues, principal
Yeah.
investigator meetings to discuss what you're doing and that kind of thing. And she passed me one day in the corridor and she said to me, Selena, do you really think medications are the solution for everything? And to be quite honest, at that time, I'd spent 20 years at that point of a dedicated effort to getting all the latest techniques, technologies, drugs. I worked with Pfizer and all sorts of different places. And I was really in a tunnel, a belief system, a mindset of my own that I was on the right track. I just needed to dig deeper. And I think this is really relevant to our conversation about how we end up digging deep in our life.
Correct.
And then the older we get, the deeper we get, because we get harder and harder to change the aperture on the lens is what I like to call it. But I got lucky because for some reason I did change the aperture, and then I started to step back, and it was changing my environment, getting recruited back to Australia, transitioning back to Australia, that she planted seeds that I didn't realize until 3 years later that changed my mindset and changed my life and changed my lab and changed everything I did, and including my hair color at that point. But so it was this. So how I got into neuroplasticity is from having a background in being medically trained, also really getting deep in neurobiology and neuroscience and understanding how the processes work in terms of publications and grants and the whole system. And that turns out to be very important to my development as a neuroscientist and understanding why and the potential of neuroplasticity. And it's not also a cure-all. It's just another tool in the armory. And I've got even more so into that mindset now because I believe we need a middle way. Because and you probably see this, people like A and B solutions.
Sure. So,
but it's not an interweaving of things.
Oh, yeah, great. Well, what a journey and what a transition. But while all this is going on, it's like some rewiring taking place at the same time in your brain, right?
Yes,
because
definitely.
you were laying down tracks. You went in for one particular field called pharmacy, and then the whole thing and your whole life changed.
Yeah, it was slow. 20 years of change, really. But let's talk personally, because I think people can relate to personal stories.
Sure.
Is that I guess my journey really started personal development before I really understood neuroplasticity and really stepped into applying all those tools. That didn't happen in my life until 2013 when I was 47. But before that, I'd started a self-help like journey, I would call it, in the 90s, because I had imposter syndrome and I didn't think I was smart enough to be working at ANU with the top neuroscientists they were quite world-renowned neuroscientists. So it turns out ANU had some of the top neuroscientists at that time, under the leadership of Steve Redman, and Greg Stewart's still there leading it. And these are very well-known basic neuroscientists. And so it was quite daunting as someone that didn't have any of that real background at all. So I started to have to open my own mind and start to believe in myself a little bit more than I had before that time. So I kind of went on the traditional book reading journey that people take. And as you know, the self-help journey, it's 90% of the same people reading the same books year in, year out, and meaning that the application is difficult. And now I understand why that is through the brain health scenario. Wow. So, yeah. The big change happened for me when I discovered sugar as addictive as alcohol and nicotine as well in my research lab in Australia. And, I've come to see now that switching our mindset and our belief system is probably the hardest step.
It is. I mean, I could echo that and play it 10 times in stereo because, you talked about personalizing it and the preventive aspect of it. But the word that comes out and leaps out right to all of us is the word change. My three children are all doctors, and if they ever say anything repetitively over the last 30 years, Dad, you have not changed. So if we can change our brains, which is what you are saying today, how can we choose the direction that we want to go? In other words, that, if we know there's so much going on about getting off track, get on track. So how do we choose the direction? How do we get that brain to change it the way we want it to go, Selena?
Well, I think there's lots of issues there, not issues, but questions. So it's really I think I've come to see it's what I call the 10 seconds. So in 10 seconds, you can actually do something that could fundamentally change your life.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that I'm going to give you 3 examples. 1, immediately tomorrow, you could change your morning routine, and I'll talk to you about why. 2, you could turn the hot shower to cold. And I don't know if that's effective in Malaysia, because I don't know how cold your showers are, but you could do ice, put your hand in ice, for example, just for 10 seconds. Or you could take out one item of something sugary that makes you happy. You could just try reducing that one item. And that 10 seconds of that choice to try something and ask yourself, am I willing to try this, is the 10 seconds that could actually change the whole direction of your life.
Wow, that's powerful. Because it's like, a roadmap that if you can do that, then you can do the rest.
And that's the key, right? So I like the simple, I like the short, I like the sharp. And this is going to go to the Nobel Prize that was won recently for physics was on quantum entanglement. It's changed our understanding of physics.
Right.
So when I say this 10 seconds, what I'm implying is you are energetically changing something for yourself, and you won't recognize and think that that's possible, but that's really what you're doing.
So okay, go ahead. Sorry.
You see what I'm, if you can follow the pathway forward from that 10 seconds. So that sounds really simple, and it's not just that 10 seconds, of course, but it's the 10 seconds. Like, how do we help people? You think about the tunnel that's created over generations of your belief system. So you're not just your belief, you're many beliefs, right? That are all the environments you're living in are creating your belief system. So you can't just ask people to change overnight. That's a big deal. But you can ask people to do something simple that we know through scientific methods and brain imaging technology and genomics can set up the change for the pathway forward.
Wow.
Physically in the brain. So let's think about the brain like a muscle. So when you go to the gym and you're pumping weights for your arms, you can start to see with time, not immediately, but you can start to see the muscle shape changing.
Right.
But when it comes to the brain, we don't have the same capacity right now, but I believe that's coming. We have the capacity to see it in hospitals using fMRI scans, as you know probably very well. I bet how imaging and technology has completely transformed your own practice as a plastic surgeon. It has definitely made it a lot better than it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah,
and I see that for all my friends that are doctors. They're using a lot of technology. My sister's a dermatologist. She uses a lot of lasers and a lot of technology now that even each year she's learning new ones. So that's how fast these advances are. So that's coming for the brain. So I could imagine a time where people are in the gym and they'll be looking in the mirror, but they'll be able to see parts of their brain strengthening.
That would be like a bionic age, man. When we start turning around and seeing where it's all in.
Well, you see it already. So you see it with neurofeedback. You see it with TMS, transmagnetic stimulation.
Right.
Amazing podcast that I just listened to on the Andrew Huberman podcast from Stanford, where they've got this new technology where they can actually go to one specific area of the prefrontal cortex and manipulate that using TMS that changes someone's belief. Because that's the part of the brain that drives our belief about who we are and our connection to our whole body.
Right.
So this is advancing really rapidly. But, we don't want to wait for that, do we? If I can help your audience who's listening to take the step of maybe switching from hot to cold just for 10 seconds, Or in the morning, as soon as they open their eyes, putting their eyes to a panoramic view outside versus onto their phone. That switch is fundamentally changing the way stress is wiring the brain, for example. So there's simple things, but they do drive a lot of long-term consequences when followed up. But that first step is the hardest, isn't it? Because
Yes.
we don't believe, we don't see it. We don't, that awareness, like how do we help people become aware of just how much potential they have? You know, we can say all these things, just go and do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and people won't get past 1 after day 3 because the brain's heavily hardwired to keep you safe doing the same things you're used to doing. And the older you get, you need to save a lot of energy. So it keeps us stuck there.
Right. No,
So these little strategies are disrupting that system.
Right. So what you're saying is that as simple as it sounds, but the profound magnitude of the result that comes out of it. So if you're talking about, like, for example, just that breathing thing that you're talking about, what are you trying to get to us in a practical way is that is actually happening, a rewiring is going on. And if we do it repetitively, it ends up like a cable that's being formed, like CNN, a cable news kind of a network that gets us on a good track and in the direction we want to go. I mean, that's amazing. Yes. I mean, it's simple, but it's still revolutionary. When who gets up in the morning? I go take to my phone and check my emails and all that. And
everyone does. I was.
And now, but how do you? Let's say we do it repetitively, and we form a cable, and this is now becoming a new lifestyle of us to get up and have a cold shower. Start with the feet first, I guess, and then from the feet work up, right? How do you sustain it?
Well, it starts small. So I recommend pick just one item, whether it's the morning routine or the cold shower, and just pick that item, nothing else, and repeat it every day. That's it.
Wow.
Until one day you notice that you're not even thinking, it's not a choice.
It becomes a lifestyle.
Because the brain's powerful, it will automatically do the new thing you're doing, right? Because how'd you learn a language? You kept practicing da, 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 dad, 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 and then it's dad. Or driving a car is a great one. Thinking about when you first learned to drive a car or ride a bike, think of those first steps. Everyone's going through that first step. But you just keep going, don't you? Keep going, and next minute you don't remember how you learned to ride a bike or drive a car. It's the same idea. But now we've got to step back and say, what do I want to be thriving or surviving? Right. So these little steps of picking just one item, these 10 seconds to freedom, as I like to call it, is you just pick one, not a whole slew of things, not like I'm going to change my whole life. That's it. I'm changing my whole life, because it just won't happen. It happens through the smallest time. That's why I said it's the tiniest little things that are repeated, because the way these synapses, the things in the brain that drive this, they take, and the older we get, it needs more repetition, because to get them hardwired requires creating new proteins, new mRNA expression, new physical connections, and the repetition drives the production of those things.
Fantastic.
So that takes time, because you're changing your genome, you know?
Yeah. So on that score and on that note, how to handle habits? Say if somebody has bad habits, I've got bad habits and I want to change them to good habits. Where does that change process take place? Because the brain seems to be like a computer now. And the more and more we learn is all about processing. It's all about what has been hardwired, and we want to change it now into the soft part of it, the software part of it. So if someone has got some real bad habits, how can they kind of switch around and change it?
Yeah, so there's a part of the brain called I don't know how much detail you want me to tell the audience, but there's a definite there's a part of the brain that where you're creating a new habit. And then as soon as you've created that new habit, it gets switched into a different part of the brain called the lateral striatum.
Okay.
And that's now an automatic habit. But you don't get the new automatic habit until you've set up in this other section of the brain through this action sequence that we just described. So yes, we all have bad habits. Mostly we've inherited them, and many we won't even realize what we've been born with. We're not born a blank slate. So that's why we won't even know some of our habits. So I would not look at, that's what I was saying. The biggest thing here is to recognize that it's just one little thing at a time.
Right.
So don't think that you have a lot of bad habits. Just think, I'm going to try this one thing that I know leads to more, healthy, happy, strong feelings, driving up the positive neurochemicals by understanding my brain. And I've got to put stuff in place, because the biggest thing to do is to prevent the way stress is attacking the brain. Right. Because that keeps us stuck. That really keeps us stuck.
Yeah.
And so this morning routine, this culture, they're the things that help change the way stress is coming at the brain.
Right. This, you said a word that is I'm allergic to, which reminds me of Woody Allen, who is an American, he's an actor. And he was asked, Selena, he was asked this question. He said, Woody, what do you think? What are your views about death? And he replied and he answered, I don't like it. So the word that you've just mentioned is the word stress. And I know it played a havoc in my own life, that I ended up with a scar on my chest from open heart surgery. So stress is really the cause of all that's happening around us, isn't it? And yet we try to shun it away, because it becomes part of it's already wired in, like as if it's from the time we go to work and the time we come back home, it's just S. And so I want you to kind of like touch on it, because I know I paid a big price. And one of the topics I wanted to talk about was stress, and you are like a savior for stress, How does one handle this whole thing on stress? I don't like it, but it's cost a lot of people problems, including myself. Talk to us.
I think the thing about it that people won't be aware of is just that because of the way the brain architecture, the way the brain's been built over a long period of time, it takes in stress at a greater rate than pleasure and happiness. Right. So if we want to drive up positive neurochemicals and pathways in the brain, we as humans have to consciously drive it in. So we might think that we're handling stress, meaning we think we're spinning plates. I like to think of this image is you've got 10 plates spinning in the air, and people that are probably listening to your podcast are probably all high performers, or people that think that they can handle anything. And so they see a plate start to come down, and so they just grab the stick and poke it back up, and they're really relieved they got that plate back up there. And I'm speaking because that was me as well. And until my plates crashed down completely, and I had my own personal experience of thinking I was Superwoman, and then I wasn't. And that's before I understood all of these things. So understand your brain's always processing stress, because that's what it's designed to do, to keep you safe and alive. It's always looking for threats. Right. Always. Whether it's the way someone looks at you, whether it's how you're thinking about money, or whether it is money, whether it's your children, are they getting into where you want to go? Your career. There's so many of these factors, and that's just what I call the superficial stresses, because then there's the real stresses. There's real stresses that people are born into poverty. They're born, there's all these other things called the adverse childhood experiences work of Ander and Folletti out of California, that are the systemic stresses that we're born to. Some of us have more than others. And that gears that experience, both resilience and stress, between the ages of 0 and 18, set up our brain development for how we do handle all of these superficial stresses later in life.
So that's a big change, isn't it? Because to know that itself is a bit relieving.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I've worked out is that even though we don't like this, and these are hard topics sometimes, but everything stays the same in silence. Yeah. So knowledge and education raise all boats. The boats don't come up at once. It's like a tide where one person really gets it and they're out the front and they're like, come join me. And then everyone's still on the beach going, no way, that's garbage. I'm not going out there. I'm going to drown. So that's how I see that anyone that's a pioneer, or, for me, I went in at 30 years ago to understand this, and it took me a long time. So it's not surprising that people can't just jump on the boat and go, yes, I want to thrive and be resilient. I want to, because mostly people are still stuck in suffering because we've never shown people how to grab the rope to get on the boat.
Yes.
And that's what science, people are going to say, what are you saying? What's the advances? Well, I think the significantly two huge advances in my time have been our ability to see inside the living human brain functioning using functional MRI, which is people complete a task inside a scanner, then we can see which parts of the brain for the first time lit up.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this cold shower, this cold thing, we now know it activates and changes the brainstem and the cerebellum, and it activates the analgesia part of the brain, the periaqueductal gray area that makes people feel better.
Right.
So we can see that. So there's no real subconscious anymore. We can see the subconscious for the first time in history.
This is why you're such an evangelist for this, because, people who are walking on the streets, and they need to know that when they come home, there is such a thing called the brain, that it's so resourceful that we can turn to it for help and guidance and strength, than fighting the battle every day and coming back exhausted.
Yes.
I want to take you from what you're saying, Selena, to thoughts. Okay, because the mind is forever creative in its thinking. We're always thinking of something, right? And these thoughts all come to a constellation of that becomes a narrative. And a lot of people have developed narratives in their life with limiting self-beliefs. They can't do this and all that. How does one, with all that neuroscience knowledge, break free from that? Because I get into this LinkedIn and I see practically every transformational coach is about getting into step, getting unstuck, get on track. And I keep telling myself, why is everybody on the wrong tracks in life? You know what I mean? So I think building the right narrative at a very young age is critical to living a long, healthy, loving life.
Yes.
You agree with this?
This is why you call me an evangelist, which I don't really want to be. I just want to, but that's why I can't stop, because I think this is a fundamental thing and I do talks in schools for this very reason, and with police and child protection and youth justice, because it is a game changer.
It is.
Because because the younger brains are more plastic, and what we're doing in society is we're starting to do a too far shift to this idea that people are fragile.
Right.
Whereas we're not fragile. We're actually incredibly strong and resilient, as you've seen. The stuff that you see humans cope with and thrive through is just incredible. But we tend to put the lens around our fragility. So I think this knowledge where we teach people, hey, this is what the brain looks like. We are humans, so we can actually do something different to animals. We can actually get into the top part of our brain, like you and I are having this conversation. And in 1 second, we can teach someone listening in the audience that a cold shower might be just a step or choice that they can try that might just get them unstuck.
Wow.
Because the reason I love this so much, the morning routine, the cold showers, doing something that's really novel, is because once you do that, if you don't think you can do it, and then you do it and you repeat it and you get stronger and better, then all of a sudden your belief system starts to shift. Well, I thought I hated cold showers. But look, I just did it. What else have I got this mindset around? See, it's the step into something that's a game changer. Because you're starting to play around with the system that you're currently operating in. It's disrupting that system that you put yourself in.
Yeah. I mean, this is This is revolutionary, Selena. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is real bad facts of life. Just step into the shower, start from your feet, work your way up to the back
Yes.
of your neck, where, the brain is connected to the spinal cord, get that whole thing cooled down. And
Yes.
the
And
brain is already firing differently.
I have another idea too for the audience.
Uh-huh.
If you can't get, because you need to be under 15 degrees Celsius kind of thing. And I know you're coming from Malaysia. So one other thing that I learnt on my podcast with quite an amazing man called David Lee and his doctor, who doesn't want to be named because he's booked out,
Okay.
is one idea is to stand on so just stand with your two legs straight, then lift one leg in front of you, and then close your eyes, and then try and hold that for 5 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out this is a really difficult thing. And what he discovered was it really helped people with PTSD, meaning really extreme examples of people that are suffering. I think we all have some forms of PTSD, to be honest, from surviving in human life. I really do think that, but there's always extreme forms, right? People that have been on the front lines, first responders in war, COVID-19 on the front line. There's so many examples of people that have seen a lot of trauma in their life. That's part of their job, for example. Anyway, so this doctor talks about how he calls them cerebellar exercises. And it's just another way to do something.
Is this area at the back of the brain for those who are watching, the cerebellum, right? And this is for balance. More for anything else. Yeah. Okay.
No, what he's shown and what the new research is now showing, it looks like the cerebellum is really important for emotional memories.
Okay.
And if they're really strong emotional memories that got wired in there through seeing something out, extraordinary the brain can't handle, it looks like they might go into that section of the brain.
Right.
And those memories aren't time stamped.
Okay.
Meaning that if it's really traumatic or really big, the brain will keep remembering that as if it happened right now rather than 10 years ago. So what he's coming up with a hypothesis, he's a psychiatrist in Australia. His hypothesis is that by doing this leg exercise and other novel things like learning to juggle, you're actually changing the timestamp on those memories.
Wow. Okay.
It's revolutionary in some sense. He's been doing it for 20 or 30 years. In another sense, he's dealt with a lot of police officers and other people like that. And it's just another technique in my mind for people to see, to try something new.
Yes.
To say, can I do that? We're talking here on your podcast. What are the steps? Because I've come to see after I've been doing this for at least 8 years now, trying to help people see neuroplasticity potential using all sorts of platforms and giving talks. And I guess the one thing I've come to now is that it's the belief and it's the mindset that dictates everything. And you keep coming back to it too. And all these self-help books keep being published year on year on year. And it's because without the brain being changed first, we'll always go back to safety. And that's what we know. And we just keep repeating what we know well. Whereas these steps of that 10 seconds to freedom, that 10 seconds to just ask yourself one little question, okay, I'm just going to flip the cold over. I'm going to flip to cold. I'm going to try this one leg exercise. I'm going to not have that drink just today to see how I feel. It's that 10-second allows the top part of the brain to kick in, the prefrontal cortex. And it's without us getting to that brain understanding and that health, we won't. That's why we'll keep having coaches and transformation talks until 2400.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. There's so many coaches, you don't know which train to take. And this is so refreshing and so rewarding to listen to this from you. You're a scientist, you're a neuroscientist, and you're giving us day-to-day bubble baths of what we can use to make life so interesting first thing in the morning. But I want to give you something else. I want to take you something else, Selena. Yesterday, I walked into my clinic and I saw something and I flipped on my staff. Where on earth are these trigger points, and how do we just default it and, and stop it and disrupt it?
So I would say leading up to entering the clinic, something had already happened before that.
No, I was singing. I was singing. And I was like rock and rolling, coming in, with Selena in my brain.
So,
And
okay, so what did you see?
well, I walked in and I saw something like the calendar. I've got my nurses always. I've been trained like that. And the calendar showed October and we are in November. And that means to me that nurse didn't come to the front and check the front counter, because that's the first thing, patients will walk in. But I've been wired like that. I've got a cable news network that has got triggering fires in it. So I tend, but what I'm trying to get is that, metacognition, thinking about what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Is
But
there a way that
you can't do it in that moment?
you can't do it? Absolutely. So
The
where
only thing,
tell me, let me cut you this, because this is important for all of us.
Yeah.
Where are these
Yeah.
trigger points located in the brain?
so where the back is, see where your hand at the back is?
Yep.
And up through that section from your brainstem, the brainstem all the way up through up and before the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, all the way up.
Yeah, so starting all the way up, same from your spinal cord.
Right, all the way up.
Through the brainstem, through the cerebellum, all the way up.
Wow.
And because remember, it's not just that brain, that you're a whole nervous system.
Yeah, right.
So your whole body is a nervous system. So you're sensing your environment all the time. So it's not just one part of the brain, it's a whole lot of things. And that's why sight, visual cues are the most powerful. It could be a sound too. And it can be a smell for some people. And these triggers have been built in over a really long period of time, and we won't even work out where they've all come from necessarily. Some of them could have come from your father or your mother, for example.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So
Yeah.
and it could also mean that, and this is another thing I love about this. I just did a great podcast with Tracy Dennis Tawari from New York Uni, who's a professor of anxiety, and she's praising anxiety. And she's saying what you can do is to use it to gather information. So why is that triggering you? Do you need to make a change in your life? So you're saying it's the calendar and all of this, but sometimes it's really good to use this information to say, that one thing you could say it's the nurse not flipping it. Another side of the information could be that you're predicting the future. And it's like, I don't want to be looking at these calendars anymore. I want to be doing something else. I've been doing this. I'm just putting it out there. I don't know. But she's saying to use anxiety as your friend, work out what that information's telling you, prepare, and then leverage from that information, and then let go.
Wow.
So she's saying that's not necessary that you need to get rid of all your triggers. It's to use the information that they're providing you to make the changes that subconsciously you want to make, but you're not enacting, for example.
Right. And so what's happening is it's disrupting the pathway that may have been already wired in that way.
Yes.
Which is a default mode, and then, disrupting
Exactly.
it.
She's saying 3 L's. Listen to what it's saying, leverage the information, then let it go.
Wow. Perfect.
And that's not easy to do in those moments, but but we can do it beforehand, you see. We do the preparation. The brain needs a lot of preparation. And it doesn't mean these things are so hardwired. They're not going to go away overnight. Absolutely. But they can become less powerful, and they can make you become way more aware in your life. In terms of all sorts of things from childhood, from all sorts of things, the way you normally react, you can start to make changes.
Yes.
And I think the quote that I said to my daughter yesterday in the car, the Einstein quote about repeating things and expecting a different outcome is insanity.
Wow. That's right. Absolutely. It's true, isn't it? I mean, it's
but we keep doing that, but now that you're willing to ask yourself these questions, you're actually becoming self-aware of the fact that you even stopped and noticed and want to do something different. That's the hardest step, isn't it? Most people just keep doing it, and then they'll be dead.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like Walking Dead, you just Selena, while you're still at it, let me just very quickly bring you onto the point of, these are trigger points. And I think frustration is the biggest bullet, because when things happen always in the same mode, you tend to give up easily. People who get frustrated, like making mistakes, they keep on doing it at the same time. And you can be self-defeating and self-quitting, quitting quietly. And giving up. And I think it's important that the brain, how does the brain handle of getting mistakes and getting up again and keep on going on? You know what I mean? Where does the rewiring take place?
So the key here is your brain always wants to move to the least resistance.
There you are.
Always, because
Always.
It needs, just from a physical standpoint, the brain across our lifespan needs a lot of blood and oxygen. A lot. So as we get older, then it might need it for digestion or other things. So it will drive you to do the thing that's the easiest, because it saves the brain a lot of oxygen.
Right. You feel like telling your brain, why do you do this to us?
Well, it's smart. It's very clever. Doesn't mean it's not serving us. It's serving itself. So it's really good at doing that. It's really good at keeping you safe and alive. It's also very good at saving energy. It's a physical, dynamic organ. It's not there to make you super powerful unless you drive it. That's what we talk about all the time, right? Becoming the boss of our brain, driving it for its capacity of neuroplasticity. But it won't just happen, will it? It's these simple little things that drive the changes, and it needs quite a lot more than you think it does. And especially as we get older. As we get older, it needs more, not less. And what people tend to do at 60, 70, and 80 is they start taking things out of their life rather than bringing more in.
Right. Now this is mind blowing. This is revolutionary, and I mean that's why I say in the beginning, there's no stopping of learning, because the more
and it's never too late. It's never too late.
Thank you.
Never. So no, there's a guy that's there's the Iron Nun, for example. I don't know if anyone's heard about the Iron Nun, who's done 45 triathlons. She's now 93 running. She's like, was it on a Nike ad at 86?
Really?
For her athleticism. And then there's a guy that's 88, and he was a dentist in England, and he hated his decrepit old body at that point. So he started weightlifting. And he ended up becoming the world champion at 200 meters sprint at 8:93. He's no longer with us. There's also Eddie Jaku, who wrote the book, The Happiest Man on Earth. And he survived the Holocaust concentration camps. And his book just got released when he was 100.
Wow.
And he's now, he passed away, but he lived to 100. He survived 4 years of being in the concentration camp. And in this beautiful audio book, I highly recommend it. He ended up living in Sydney, actually. But he describes what it takes to be the happiest man on earth. Wow. And so he's someone that went through severe adversity and then moved to a new country, all sorts of things. And he describes this idea of developing skills, making the choice that happiness is a choice. Yes. In no matter which situation you're in. And I think the biggest message that I got out of his book that I loved, which is why I love your podcast and I love podcasts, and is being kind. So when you give out information like this, you don't know which ears it's going to, you don't know who's benefiting. It's an extreme form of kindness.
Yes, I think so. I mean, there's no measure to it, because someone out there is listening to you right now and probably standing on one foot, Yeah,
well, I know someone, I also bring people onto my podcast that actually reached out to me from listening to the podcast. And there was a guy in South Australia called Guy McGillivray, who looks after people. He's a psychologist. And I was on the radio in Adelaide talking about sugar. And the guy interviewing me, the interviewer, thought it was all garbage. He said, no way that, he was kind of making fun at me and stuff like that. But Guy was listening, and he goes, I was just like the radio interviewer. I love my sugar. Why should I have to give it up? I'm not going to. And then all of a sudden something clicked in him. And then he started to listen to the podcasts. And then all of a sudden he just said, I'm going to give it a go. And he did. And all sorts of things flowed from that choice, all sorts of things. And he's
I
on
can
my
imagine.
podcast. Yes.
Listen,
So I'm saying it was one choice
thing.
to open and ask himself the question, what if?
Right.
And I think that's what we keep asking, that we've got to ask ourselves the question, what if,
No, listen, I know we're coming towards the end, and I've got a few more questions up my sleeve. It's a whole gamut of things that we have covered today, and I love you for that. But talking about sugar, I am a sugar addict. I love my ice cream. I love my cakes. I mean, I can smell a chocolate, even though there's no smell. You know what I mean? I've got my brain on a radar to go and get my treats and my, tell me in the next, 5-10 minutes, can I be freed of this addict, because it's caused so much of havoc to me?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I was like you, but that's driven all by stress. So there's
I
two
don't like
things
the
that
word.
It's just that we've got to talk about the brain, because stress and reward are wired together in the brain, because the brain hates too much stress, so it drives our brain to seek rewards. So when I give presentations to people, I always say, how do you even know if your brain's stressed out? And the way to know that is by what you're eating.
Wow, okay, that's important.
That's how you know your brain, not whether you want to say you are or not, doesn't matter, because the brain's processing it. Remember, it's wiring it, it's wired by it, and it's wired over generations. So when you're seeking those rewards, it's a great way, that's why I love it. It's a tool for you to now know your brain's stressed out. Okay. So you can't just go off something that you've been using to medicate stress. With some people it's alcohol, some people it's gambling, some people it's work. We all are addicted to something. For me, it's running. So I'm just coming off running at the moment. But if we don't, so I came off sugar slowly, because that was my go-to when I was running a big lab and raising a family. It would be, the vending machine, the glass of wine for dinner, yes, 2 glasses of wine, then wanting chocolate after dinner, you name it. That's what I was doing. And for me, when I got the recognition through my research showing sugar activates the same parts of the brain that alcohol and nicotine do, and changes the physical structure of the brain the same way, then I had to start taking out one at a time. But then I knew I had to put something else in.
Right.
Because stress isn't going away, is it?
Okay.
Stress is always going to be there. Aging's stressful, to be honest. Right. So what do we do instead? So you have to build in other things that the brain, because the brain doesn't care where you get the reward from to mitigate the stress. So you can use the power of the brain to drive your brain to pick healthier things, for example. So one example would be raw nuts, not roasted and salted. But for me, I turned to raw cashews and almonds for a while, and I still do that.
Okay.
And then these showers, the morning routine, all of those things are dampening the way stress is wiring the brain, which means you'll seek less of those sugary rewards too. So there's lots of steps. I mean, I wrote my book, Smashing Mindset, specifically for this purpose.
Oh, we've got to get that.
I'm addiction neuroscientist.
Right.
And so always remember, addiction is medication for stress.
Fantastic. I mean, oh gosh, I should have met you 30 years ago, because then I would have, had nothing but addiction, more of other things than stress. But I'm a big advocate, as we close, on smart aging. It's part of my practice, because just the fact of aging is just a side effect of living. And we talk about always the free radicals, and I call them biological terrorists, because the very fact that every cell is living, these bad actors that come out and cause destruction. Now, tell me,
sugar is very inflammatory. Very inflammatory to the body.
Thank you for telling me that at 1:55, because but it's true, because it's eaten up all my vessels to my heart. As stress is the main culprit. But what about brain aging? Can we now I've always talked about, and I told you about Robert Boyle and the prolongation
Mhm.
of life.
Yeah.
Can we prevent brain aging? I mean, we're talking about longevity today, and people are
Yeah.
living longer. So by all the steps that you have nurtured and told us today, I suspect that is going to keep us living longer, just like how the
Yes.
telomeres, can stretch
Yes.
out and give you,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's no doubt about that. But there's so many other confounding factors related to genetics. And I don't want to put out there some Pollyanna story about longevity, because I
Yeah.
understand that there's some genetic diseases and all sorts of factors where people die at different ages related to nothing to do with them. They're living really healthy, beautiful lives. And they're
Yes.
great people, but they get really bad genetic mutations that might drive cancer or other things. But they've lived a great life, probably better than someone that's lived a long life. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, but yes, there's something. Let's just talk about some little things that you can do. I think what I've come to see is the number one thing that's probably really important as we age is preventing falls.
Right.
Because falls as you get older lead to all sorts of unintended consequences, which is that just happened to my mother. But so how do you do that? Well, you've got to be strong skeletally, which means you've got to have strong bones and muscles and internal core strength to
Right.
keep you to respond well to all sorts of things that you may not see, right? Which is what being able to prevent a fall or being able to pick something up quickly, reflex action that's coming from your fine motor neurons and your motor neuron system. And so what they've shown recently in terms of indicators for early onset dementia, if that's the part of aging you want to focus on, is that grip strength.
Right.
And being able to stand on one leg with your eyes closed. And some parts of cognitive training are predictors of early dementia.
Okay.
So building this motor neuron strength and moving your body is an essential ingredient outside just making you feel well. It's also really good for strength
Right.
across your lifespan.
Right.
So I think that's a big one that will help people extend their life. I also met this amazing person called Dr. Mario Martinez, who studied centenarians and super centenarians, people that have lived 100 to 110 well, not the ones that aren't so well, but the ones that are still quite well. And he said the number one thing, there's 4 factors, but the number one thing is your belief about aging.
Right. Absolutely.
So the time and space, having no time and space about aging. What he means by that is that he'll meet a 103-year-old tending to his garden, and he'll say to him, I can't wait to show you my garden in 3 years.
Wow.
That's one example. And there's other examples too and I can go on and on about this, but it's your belief about and it can be simple things like how you enjoy a cup of tea, for example. Like you really enjoy that moment. You enjoy just waking up and breathing. So that belief that you're, and Eddie Jacob talks about this in his book too, and I see it in my own life and others. It's just just loving to be alive drives loving to be alive, which drives loving to be alive across your lifespan. And then that takes out a lot of other things, right? Because then as you feel better, you bring in all these other things which you hear about in the blue zones, around connection and being supported and eating kind of not too much, 80% full, more green vegetables and lean meats than not. It doesn't say about no alcohol or anything. It's more about how you're consuming it, that kind of thing. So all those other factors, of course, are important. But he said it's that belief about aging that really became the number one thing that separated the healthy centenarians from the unhealthy ones.
Oh, that's a beautiful place to close, where we just have the feeling of loving life. And I think Robert Boyle 350 years ago said it right. The number 2 point was the recovery of youthfulness. And no matter what age you are, but if you're feeling youthful from the inside, that itself is a winner. and no age can defeat that. So on that note, I want to thank you, Selena. You've been such a blessing. I love you for all your work. Thank you for all these nuggets of wisdom. And it's very important that, you continue to be with us, stay with us, and be mindful of us. So that, so let me end by just hugging my brain. And thank you for making us brain conscious, because it's very important that we stay alive to be able to enjoy this life. And we owe it all to you. So once again, thank you for joining us on HEARTtalk.